Welcome to another episode of the Chicks on the Right show. We are very, very excited to have someone with us that probably a lot of folks in our audience are already familiar with through social media. Robby Starbuck is our guest, and you may recognize his posts from going after lots and lots of companies about their DEI programs and really creating awareness and actual online campaigns to get those companies to stop the crazy DEI stuff that they've got going on. But you may not know that Robby used to be a music video director. So we want to find out how you started at point A and are now basically at point Z.
Yeah. They're diametrically opposed sort of arenas, right? It is interesting. They're both probably the most difficult arenas to, sort of penetrate in different ways. And, on the music side of things, essentially, if I go all the way back as a kid, I was just in love with music and in love with films. And so I knew I wanted to, do something in that arena. And I figured, why don't I just fuse the two together, right? And so as a kid, I was sneaking into shows and filming artists and then showing them what I filmed. And it was probably awful at first. I was probably terrible because I'm completely self-taught. Right. And, eventually it was good enough where one of them was like, hey, we want to use this. Can we give you a couple $100, or something like that? It was something ridiculous. And okay.
And where was it?
Well, I was in the area. I lived in Temecula, California. That's where I mostly grew up. But outside of that area, I would drive hundreds of miles sometimes, at 15, 16 years old to go do this. So, I'd kind of go anywhere and try to film artists that, I felt like, okay, maybe people will want to see what they're like live, right? And you got to remember, this is early on where there's not a lot of videos of artists online, on the internet. But
this is 90s? This is 2000? When was this?
The 2000s, but this was early on, early YouTube, things like that. So I was one of the early people in the partner program at YouTube.
Okay.
Because we had tons of music videos. So I actually did interesting deals with labels. I think in Hollywood, it's very hard to break in if you're not, connected to, the Hollywood elite, or you're not from a wealthy family or something along those lines, right?
Right.
And for me, I was none of those things. And so I had to have a differentiator. And for me, it was that we were breaking the mold of how this had always worked. When I came into the industry, everything had kind of still been shot on film, and it was very expensive to shoot a music video. And very expensive to shoot a commercial, really expensive to shoot anything, right? And they had sort of insulated their industry by having things be so expensive because anybody who wasn't a part of that world basically had a barrier to entry they couldn't get over, right? My production company changed that because we would go to these record labels and say, hey, we can do these videos for 1/10 of the cost that you're paying for now. And a lot of them would say, okay, we'll take the gamble on that, right? Because it's 1/10 of the cost. Let's see what he can do. And we were doing things digital, and barely anybody was. In fact, a video I did for the Smashing Pumpkins, I believe, was the first music video ever shot on the Red camera, which if you kind of look at the history of cameras now, the Red is used, all kind of industry-wide in many respects, along with the ARRI Alexa. So we were very, very early. We had that first one that we were able to shoot with that and had worked with the company to do that. And so we were breaking new ground in terms of that, and also how we shot and marketed the videos. I don't know any directors at the time who did similar deals to what I was doing, where I was going to artists and saying, I will actually fund your video, but I want the rights so that I can monetize it on the internet.
Oh,
and so we own the rights to a lot of videos, and it was basically just a marketing tool for the artist, and they couldn't see the future, and the record labels couldn't see the future in online monetization, but we did. I saw it as a long-term investment. So some of those videos go on to have hundreds and hundreds of millions, if not billions of views on the internet. Music videos monetize quite well, right? So
yeah.
We were at the forefront of all that. And I built the company from the ground up. I was the sole owner, never took out a bank loan, anything like that. So it was really a bootstrap operation. And we ended up with over a dozen directors across the world doing commercials, music videos, documentaries, working with the major studios. And then in 2015, I was kind of on my own journey too, because my kids were getting older, at least our oldest was. And I was starting to see things through a new lens. And that was the lens of a dad whose daughter and her peers are starting to engage with the world and culture. And I had to like examine my own impact, right, on culture. And I'm like, I'm really putting lipstick on a pig and I'm compromising my values on a daily basis. And if I'm being really honest with myself, I can't raise my kids to have integrity and live out their values if I'm compromising mine every day. And so I've got to be willing to take risks and trust God and do something different. And so around that same time, obviously, we have the primaries politically. And I was always very conservative. My family's from Cuba, so it shouldn't be a surprise. I'm like as anti-communist as they come. I was always very deeply interested in it, because I understood how lucky I was to be an American. And so during that election, I talked to my wife. My wife's from Texas, and I said, I feel like I need to say something because I also was sort of an anomaly in the sense that I had built an online following already. And that was something not very many directors had done before. And so I was like, I'm going to talk about this stuff. I feel like there's sort of different rules for different folks. And if you're on the left, you're allowed to talk about it. But if you're on our side, you're supposed to shut up.
Exactly.
And I couldn't.
Did you have were you out there talking on your channels or just doing the produced videos? Like when you made that decision to say something, had people already been familiar with you as a person or just your work?
Yeah. So they both, they had been familiar with both. So I had, there's directors like in the old school cinematic universe, like Tarantino, who, they have like a public persona. Like that was kind of how things were with me online at that point. And so, it's different arena, but it's, sort of similar thing where people know your name and kind of what you're about and things like that. And so I came out and I endorsed Trump early on in the Republican primary, which it wasn't enough I came out as a Republican. Like to come out and endorse Trump was like a whole different thing, right? So my company at the time had a deal with one of the largest movie studios. And I remember they called me. And they were like, Robby, it's not too late to go back on this. You can go back on this. Just say you didn't understand it. You didn't understand his immigration policy, so on and so forth. And I said, well, that's going to be tough to do because that was actually the selling point for me. The immigration policy was the selling point.
Wow.
And as a Latino, it was like, I think in their eyes, a special betrayal, right? Because like I'm not supposed to hold these views, but they're not incredibly intelligent about politics in Hollywood. So I don't think they understood the nuance of like Cubans tend to be very anti-illegal immigration. And there's sort of like there's different groups, subgroups within the Latino category. And quite a lot of them actually think illegal immigration is a bad thing. So, but I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I knew what was coming, before I came out and endorsed Trump, my wife and I had the conversation. We knew I was going to lose business. We knew it was going to affect the company. And we were right. Hollywood is in many respects forgiving to the very worst things. Hollywood will forgive you if you sexually abuse people. It will forgive you if you are the worst sort of narcissist and treat people terribly. Hollywood will forgive you if you rape people even. Hollywood will forgive the worst behavior, but Hollywood will not forgive one thing. And that's coming out and being conservative. It's coming out and saying, you know what, actually, I oppose this left-wing ideology. I oppose this crazy Marxist, belief system you're trying to force onto America. That's the one thing Hollywood won't forgive. Yeah. And I knew that, and I was okay with it. And so we had kind of trusted God that, we were going to go in a different direction. And at the time, my wife and I had sort of wisely invested in everything. And so we felt like it was a risk we should take. If we didn't, who was? So
was the backlash that you faced as bad as you expected? Was it worse? Did you lose a lot of followers in addition to business deals? Or was it a combination of everything?
I think I was pretty clear-eyed going into coming out politically. So the backlash wasn't worse than I expected. It was kind of what I expected. In terms of audience, it was pretty mixed. I think a lot of people were sort of interested in why. If you think about it, around 2015, they were still building up the propaganda to make people totally terrified in the normal population of this idea of voting, this way. So people were more curious than anything else. There wasn't sort of the orange man bad Trump derangement syndrome yet,
Yeah.
So it was more curiosity. Obviously, there were some people, mostly Hollywood-based people, a very small group, who were angry at me online and were like, how could you? This is awful. And I got a lot of text messages that were like,
What about friends and people within the company that knew you, but then when you came out, you're like, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to endorse Trump. I'm going to do this. Because we've experienced that.
Yeah.
Just personally, that That's been tough. I'm just wondering, like, personally,
That
did
was
you experience
that was very different. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, in terms of employees, it was a very different response. And I never ideologically tested employees. I was never like,
Right.
you all agree with me on politics?
Totally.
I was always hiring people like, are you the best for the job? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously there was a range of political views. So I had some employees come to me and be like, this is awesome, you're doing this. I had other employees that were like, hey, I disagree with you, but I know you're a good person and I don't like what people are saying about you. It's definitely not accurate and I've defended you and blah, blah, things along those lines. So people who actually were like day-to-day basis worked with me, they knew that, even if they disagreed with me, that my reasons were, not because I was like a Nazi, right? Like,
Right. Which is
that was,
great. That's awesome.
that was crazy. And it was crazy to sort of frame me in that direction. But then you had, sort of the Hollywood friendship matrix, right? Which is a total farce. And I always knew that. I've never been one of those people like, to give you an idea, this probably says quite a bit about me. Like even when I was nominated for awards at like the MMVAs or the VMAs and things like that, I never went, not once. I never went to the award shows. Even when I won awards at these award shows that were like, televised award shows, I never went ever.
Wow.
And I knew I didn't fit there and I didn't go to the parties or any of that stuff. Like I knew kind of through the grapevine that I was not in alignment with their value set and that it was a place I was going to be deeply spiritually uncomfortable and I would have to, it would put me in weird positions and I didn't want to be in that position.
Yep.
And so, and now we're finding out just how sordid and terrible it is, right? Like, I mean,
Right.
even at that point, I can say when I was, sort of early on in my career, I never imagined it was as bad as we're understanding it is, today. I knew it was gross. I knew there was sort of this gross quid pro quo that was going on. But it's so much worse than I think anybody imagined. And, in that respect, I feel blessed that I feel like God protected me from a lot of the worst things in that industry, but there's not real friendships, right? That's the truth. There's not. You're as valuable to somebody as the step you are on the ladder for them to get on and get to the next place. So it's really about like, how can you help people, right? The minute you're no longer helpful to advancing people, you're useless, right? And I understood that from the very beginning of being in that industry. And that's why I never invested a ton into friendships, in that direction. I invested into, my family, my wife, my kids, because that's the thing that lasts. That's the thing, like, I always remind myself this, like when I die one day, hopefully it's in a very long time, but you never know, right? I know that the people who are going to be there are my wife and kids. And outside of that, nothing is guaranteed, nothing's promised. And, that's what matters to me is those people that are going to be there and making the world a better place for them while I'm here.
And that's what
Well,
should
and
matter.
you're doing all the right things to be loud and proud about your own beliefs and also to make people aware of some of the crazy stuff that's going on. Talk about the film that Elon Musk even retweeted, and it has millions and millions of views, the War on Children. What inspired you to make it? And tell people who haven't seen it a little bit of the background.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been incredible. The War on Children now has crossed over 60 million views, and we never imagined that when we were making it. We didn't think it was going to be the most watched documentary of like the last decade, but it just popped off. It went crazy after Elon, backed it and put it out there online, and Donald Trump Jr. supported it. And a whole range of other people. I can't even go down the list. Just very thankful so many people supported it. And, the fact that it hit such a broad swath of people has really built a beautiful legacy for the movie. And that's that it has helped spur and encourage a lot of child protection laws. So even here in Tennessee, it really helped us with the death penalty for pedophiles. That was something my wife and I made a big priority and lobbied for relentlessly to make sure that we had the just worst consequences possible for child rapists. And we were able to get that done here in Tennessee and in other states where, lawmakers watched the movie and they talked with us and they felt, like this was important. And then also getting rid of these horrific, barbaric procedures that were being carried out on kids in the name of transgenderism. The film has helped a lot to open up people's eyes. You know, I think the interesting thing about the movie is Rand Paul's wife, Kelly, she actually told me that the most wonderful thing about the film is she knows so many people who just don't believe that horrible things are really happening, or that there's a coordinated, element or effort out there to derail the future of our children and to sexualize them and screw them up mentally. And so being able to share this movie with people has been able to be an eye-opener, right? So if they don't believe that there's these horrific drag shows in front of kids, they don't believe that kids are getting, surgical procedures at 13 years old in the name of transgenderism, if they don't believe that schools are intentionally teaching them Marxist concepts or intentionally sexualizing them, the movie opens their eyes, because we're using sources anybody can trust. If they're a Democrat, independent, Republican, doesn't really matter. Anybody across the board. Like, the media called me a lot of different names and they really went after me over the movie. But one thing they couldn't do was they couldn't say I was wrong. They had a very difficult time with that because they tried relentlessly to fact check and go through the film. And we were able to back up everything with peer-reviewed research, with sources they trust. I mean, some of the, evidence that we bring forward are people that, really ideologically disagree with us, like people from Berkeley who are professors there, and peer-reviewed research that has been in, sort of the most respected left-wing publications. And so they have a hard time, trying to sort of poke holes in the arguments we're making, because we're using their own sources. And that was very intentional. I didn't want to have only things that I trusted and knew to be true. I wanted to really delve into the whole swath of evidence out there and have a movie that could be convincing for somebody who doesn't already agree with me. And so we spent a lot of time and effort on that. My favorite thing, though, about the film was doing the teen focus groups, where we got to sit down with teenagers and ask them sort of their experience and what it's like growing up today, what challenges they face. And I was really surprised by that, because we weren't sure it was something we were going to include in the movie when we had the idea to do these focus groups, because my first inclination was teenagers are not going to tell us anything. They're going to be very stonewalled. They're going to be closed off. It's going to be awkward and weird. They're not going to want to talk with us about this stuff. And they were so incredibly open. It was like the dam had broken and it was just rushing water of emotion everywhere, of them sharing everything going on for kids their age. And we learned a lot, not just as human beings concerned about this, but as parents, about what these kids are dealing with. And there's sort of a reflex, I think, from our generation and the older generations to, sort of judge this generation in a harsh way and say, like, oh, they're coddled, or, they, don't try as hard, or whatever it might be. But the truth is, they have a very difficult set of circumstances they're dealing with that are very different from what we grew up with.
Agreed.
There's pressures and things that just we never had to deal with as kids. And I'm not sure we're entirely honest about that. So, I think that's a really great thing about the movie, is it opens up people's eyes to all the challenges they do face and things that we never had to think about as kids.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that they do face a whole different set of challenges, and I also think that the pendulum is swinging a little bit. We see that. At least maybe it's just because I want to believe that, because I have a 35-year-old, a 30-year-old, and a 15-year-old. So we run the gamut in our family. But the 15-year-old, I look at her generation and I think I see them as being more conservative. I see the pendulum less woke.
I think they're going to be extremely right-wing.
Yeah, I do too, Robbie. I absolutely do. So when you talk about those kids being open and talking about their, their issues in this generation, I really do think they are rejecting all of the crazy woke crap that the previous generation, I don't even know what that would be. Would that be millennial? I don't even know.
Yeah.
I can't keep track of all the generations, because we're Gen Xers, and so I feel like they are embracing America, and they're embracing being proud of who they are as Americans, and knowing the difference between a boy and a girl. And, those are the things that we understood, and it was just common sense. And I feel like common sense is making a comeback, and that, all of that other stuff, the garbage is starting to go away, because they're tired of it too,
Yeah, the globalist left made a horrific miscalculation when it came to COVID, okay? Because COVID changed the game. They stuck a bunch of teenagers and middle schoolers in their rooms with nothing but time to research, okay?
Yes.
And watch videos and start to think for themselves. And what happened? They turned extraordinarily right-wing. When given free access to information, they shifted away from the left. And also the other big mistake they made was making teachers so incredibly woke and crazy, right? Because what happens when you're a teenage boy and you're put in a classroom with a lady trying to control your words, control your every movement, tell you essentially
and tell you that you're toxic.
Your natural biology is somehow toxic and destructive, and you should deny every part of it or else you're persona non grata. It was a big mistake by the globalist left, because these kids turn to the right and they're going to stay there. And the truth is, you had the young millennials. They were extremely far left because they were on the front end of, you know, sort of the shifting of institutions, and the media still was controlled by entities that were able to sort of program the masses for decades and decades. And they were the very tail end of that operation. When COVID happened, the media landscape shifted, and that was a part of this big radical change we see. Everybody younger, you know, high school and younger, had this big shift. And I can tell you this as a dad, I saw that shift in a really interesting way, because my oldest is 16. When we lived in California, which was seven years ago, we moved to Tennessee. And then when we first came to Tennessee, I can tell you right now, all of the kids in her peer group were either non-political, or if their families were conservative, they kept quiet, or they were openly very to the left, and they were indoctrinating sort of everybody with their viewpoints and bullying everybody to be like, you're going to be a part of the climate club, or you're going to be this or that or whatever, you know, like some crazy thing. And the radical shift that has occurred is such that I don't really know of the last time I heard somebody their age in their peer group come out and defend Democrat policies, priorities, or candidates. I don't know that. But I can tell you, I've seen tons of them in MAGA hats around town during this last election. I've seen tons of them talk about politics. I've seen my kids' friends follow me online. And I think that's something that's weird to me. You know, I'm like, I've talked to my daughter about this. I'm like, I feel a little weird about that. You know, that you're getting so old that like your friends have accounts and you guys are following me on the internet. Now I feel like I need to watch what I say. You know, I'm like, I need to be more careful and do things in like the, you know, PG version. It's hard to get comfortable with the idea that like your kid's going to college soon, you know, like that's just weird.
And we're seeing it in culture too. Like, I mean, you're seeing it like late night is affected by it. We're seeing, I mean, we're just the landscape, I think, is changing. Just all sorts of things that it used to be okay to beat up on conservatives. It's not as okay anymore, which I'm okay with that.
You know, because it's like, you know what diametrically changed is that back like 10 years ago, if you were making fun of George Bush, there was genuinely a lot to make fun of, right? There really was. Like, and I still agreed with the party position then, but I didn't agree with him. You know, like I agreed with like the you know, sort of general principles, but I disagreed with him on policy when it came to the war and things along those lines. But I was sort of always an objective person. There was stuff to make fun of there that was just funny, right? Like, even if you love the guy, the way he talked was just kind of like, you know, you were leaving it open to a lot of comedy.
It's strategery.
It is. It's strategery. And so there was something there, right? Now, so much of our identity is wrapped up in just common sense that when you go after it, you sound crazy. And that's a good thing, you know? And I think like it's incumbent on us to stay there in that common sense, you know, sort of area, because it's going to make it very hard for the left to beat us on any front, because it's when you shift out of that you become sort of fair game, right? And we have to be really honest about that. And so most people want us to be in that common sense zone. And I think that, you know, we have to find ways to shift our priorities into being in that zone. And that makes us more able to achieve what we want to achieve, right? So, you know, it's like my argument has always been, let's win every 80-20 issue. Like,
of course,
there should be no reason we don't. because almost every 80-20 issue is just pure common sense. And for a long time, both sides of the political aisle have just left them out there. And during this last election, what we saw was President Trump grab those 80-20 issues and he ran on them.
Yep.
Yes. And that includes, the DEI stuff that you've been obviously really targeting companies that everyone is familiar with and saying, we know what you're doing and we're exposing it to the world so that they can make a judgment about whether or not what you're doing makes any sense. And you've had a lot of success with getting these companies to at least say, yes, we're revising or we're getting rid of this DEI initiative.
Yeah.
Do you continue to do that work? How do you choose your targets? And what kind of changes have you seen as a result of that work?
Yeah, I mean, it's been incredible what we've been able to accomplish in the last year. And we've had a little bit of a slowdown period over the last month and a half because we're planning some things that will be happening. Folks will be hearing about that I think will be very exciting. We've still had some wins during that time period. And we're very happy with that. But I think we'll sort of ramp up and have a lot more companies to announce this summer. But yeah, essentially, I realized nobody was telling the truth about what these companies were doing. And in many respects, a lot of them were held hostage, and so they needed somebody to come in and say, hey, these people are holding them hostage. We're going to take the gun out of their hands, right? And we're going to show people what's happening. And that, by virtue of just sort of exposing it, it's going to bring down a lot of these, sort of facades that have been built up. So for the left, it was sort of about exposing how they were paper tigers, right? Because you had these groups like the HRC or Al Sharpton, and they had built themselves into these sort of mythological creatures that should be feared by corporate America, right? And what I did is I showed corporate America they're not real. They really, they don't have the power they pretend to have, but we do. And we had to show them that. We had to bare our teeth. And so, the first three companies were our sort of proving ground. It was companies testing us to see what are they actually capable of. And I say they instead of me because, I'm not Al Sharpton. This isn't about me. I'm not, so narcissistic and obsessed with myself that I believe companies are afraid of me personally. They're afraid of what I represent. They're afraid of me. I'm a megaphone for this big swath of people, and I'm very blessed to be that megaphone. And so, we had to prove ourselves, and we did. I think that everybody, who sort of supported my campaigns, we made these companies terrified. We showed the weight that we could carry. We showed the financial, sort of hammer we had. And the first company that we went up against, Tractor Supply, they lost over $3 billion in market cap when we went after them. John Deere lost over $10 billion in market cap. And then Harley Davidson is still suffering today, even after their CEO's out, because they fought us the longest. And that was really the case. People point to a lot of different things. They're like Walmart, or this company or that company is the reason companies started to just kind of give you whatever you wanted. The truth is it's Harley Davidson. Harley Davidson is the company that resulted in other companies saying we will do what you want, and it's because they saw that if they fought me and really went after me, that I was going to be the most punishing and relentless I could possibly be. And that was going to do some very bad things. In fact, Harley Davidson really recently had a board member resign. And that is very rare for board members to do. And in his resignation, he wrote essentially that the way the company mishandled the situation with me could mean the end of the company in total, that they may just not survive this because they so thoroughly decimated their reputation with their core customer base. And they had gotten so far out of line and didn't do what they should have done early on with me that they're not sure there's any coming back. And their stock price, if you look at it, it still reflects that. I mean, it was total decimation. And they got rid of the CEO, and really what's going to decide if they live or die as a company is going to be the direction the new CEO takes it in. And we're going to be watching that very closely because if they are not a reformer to get back to sort of the core of what Harley Davidson is, then I think we're going to have some things to say about it. If they do go in the right direction and they do reform back to sort of the culture that Harley Davidson is supposed to be about, just sort of an American icon, right? It's like celebration of Americana. It's not explicitly political, and that's the thing actually I think has made our campaign very successful is I'm not telling companies you need to adopt my politics. I'm saying stay out of politics.
Exactly.
There's no reason for you as a company to have a position on transgenderism. It's ridiculous.
Yes.
There's no reason you guys should have a policy on abortion. It's ridiculous. You're a company. Make make your products. Like, I don't care what it is. Like, you could be Gatorade or Pepsi or, Walmart. Like, I don't care what you make, how you sell it. Like, just make good products, provide great service, celebrate America. If you're using our money, like, try to do good for our country, but stay out of politics.
But
how did you get the info? Like, did you have moles everywhere? Like, did people that worked on the inside volunteer the information and, ask to work with you? How did you do that?
I probably have more corporate sources than anybody in American history now at this point.
Oh my gosh.
We have so many whistleblowers. It's absurd. Any company you could pick out of a hat, we have a source there. Any major Fortune 500 company, if you pull them out of a hat, we have a source at the company.
Amazing. And the brands that are taking some of the positions that they do are some of the most surprising brands to do so. That's what's so baffling to me,
Yeah.
Which is why I think these campaigns are so effective.
Right.
Because these are the companies that people are like, A2?
Yeah.
A2, John Deere?
And
what are you doing?
Right. And Tractor Supply? Are you kidding? Yeah.
So we planned this out, I think, very effectively, which was that we were going to start with companies, exposing companies that have massively conservative consumer bases, prove our power there, but also understand this is psychological. This whole wokeness operation was psychological, and we need to do something akin to that in reverse in terms of influencing the direction our country goes. So what we needed to do was build up the psychological understanding that we were the incoming wave, the tidal wave that could not be stopped. But you had to build that up, right? So you start with these companies that just can't deny their consumer bases are on my side, right? But eventually that wave gets so big, it's a tsunami that sort of engulfs everybody, right? So the tipping point for that was Walmart. When I got Walmart to back off everything, that was when corporate America really kind of fell. And they said, okay, we need to aggressively start to assess how we do things differently, because if our biggest employer in the country has changed and they're rejecting wokeness openly, we're in trouble, right? And so that was when the social fabric sort of changed, and you saw the psychology flip, and you saw frantic board meetings for, companies to stop this before they're the next company that's exposed. I mean, you got to understand too, companies spent, New York Times admitted this, they spent absurd sums of money to do opposition research on me. They have what the New York Times called a new cottage industry built around how you handle Robby Starbuck. There was a whole industry of advisors and communications professionals getting hired for how you potentially deal with me if I come after you.
And what were they expecting to find?
Well, I think it's one of those
what were
things.
That's the thing. What were they going to do?
I really don't fault them for this. And because any competent corporate CEO, if they could spend a little bit of money to try to get in front of something and say, hey, this person actually committed this crime and they haven't told anybody about it. I get it. Like, I mean, it's fair game. You put yourself in the public arena, people are going to go and they're going to do oppo research on you. Right. Totally fine with me. They wasted their money though.
Exactly.
Corporate CEO come back to me and he says, I got to, this is after we made a deal with them. He goes, Robby, I got to tell you, you totally wasted our money. We did all this research on it, and at the end of it, the answer we got essentially is you were one of the most boring people they had ever come across. They said you don't leave your house almost ever. You don't really have hobbies. You're just like, you're with your family or you're working, and that's basically it. Like, that's all you do. You don't drink, you don't do drugs, like, any of those things. And I'm like, yeah, well, I'm content with what I've got. I'm not searching for anything. I don't have some hole in my heart I'm trying to fill. I'm a pretty happy person, actually. So, I thought that was funny, but it's, if you think about it, you really can't blame them. I mean, you've got to take a shot at it, right? You've got to try.
I guess,
if there was some horrible thing, in my background, I mean, like, you'd want to use that as a company, right? You'd want to go out there and be like, hey, this guy criticizing us is actually, whatever it is.
I guess, yeah.
So I don't blame them for that, but it's interesting the desperation that sort of increased after Walmart. And I think in many respects, that's sort of what shifted the needle. And you got to keep in mind, by the way, this was happening, all of this, started well before the election. We were trying to build up this changing mindset before the election very intentionally, because we wanted to make people feel safer as you got closer to the election, being open about your rejection of wokeness. Because if you go back a year before the election, people were still very afraid to speak out about these things, especially in the workplace. And I think one of our greatest achievements through this campaign is the fact that people are no longer afraid in their workplaces, in many cases, to speak up and push back and say, hey, actually, this could be a real liability for us. This could be a real problem for the company that this is out there, that we're doing this. I think we should probably be careful with this new Department of Justice, with this new, people are not afraid to speak up about these things anymore.
Yeah.
And that's huge.
I think
It's
that's partly
wonderful.
due to Elon's, revival of Twitter. So
Totally.
because
huge.
you think about how free people immediately felt when he bought it, and people were like testing the waters, right, and like posting, "Can we say gay and retarded now?" And so they were like doing it, and it's just been such this amazing
Yes.
transformation. I think that did help people feel more courageous about being loud and proud.
Just
with what they
everything.
think.
Just being out about, exactly, just being themselves. I mean, for years we would get emails of people saying, I agree with what you guys say, but I can't say it on my college campus. I can't say it at work. I can't be conservative out loud and proud.
Right.
It's ridiculous. But now I feel like more and more people can. They can just be conservative walking around, which is a really beautiful thing, right? And it's largely in part to, obviously, the administration, but to the work that you do too. So it's wonderful. It's a great thing.
I think, there's a conversation, like, if we're being really honest, President Trump is his last term. And if you look across the landscape, one of the really important parts of his legacy is this activist base that sort of has a major influence in the grassroots, right? That's going to outlive him. And it was largely predicated on people boldly sort of standing up for him from 2016 on, or really 2015 on. I think that is going to be a huge part of his legacy, is that the people who sort of came from that in 2015 will long-term be real, sort of shifters and shapers of culture in this country. And I think we're going to see, I think we're ascendant on the right, not just politically, but culturally. And I think we have an opportunity for total dominance. There's a lot of little, micro factors that have to be considered, and things that you have to be good at, and you can't sort of screw up your opportunity. But let's just say we do 90% of things right, or 80% of things right in these opportunity pools we have right now. We could be culturally dominant for a very long period. And
I love hearing
I
that.
love that too. Gosh,
Yeah.
please let that be. Yes, I want that to happen.
Everything's building up in that direction, right? So, like, look at the media landscape right now. If you had told me 10 years ago, or told anybody 10 years ago, that the right would become dominant in the media landscape, people would say, I don't think so. I mean, the left owns the media, right?
Right.
But we are, for all the shit we give mainstream media, the truth is, at this point, we now have more power than them in independent media.
Right.
If I put up a video about a company, it gets more views than CNN in primetime.
Correct.
For a week. Like, if you take CNN's ratings for a week in primetime, combine it together, like one of my videos on wokeness at a company will get more views than that. And more social action too. The thing that's breaking down now is the structure of, how those news agencies and things were compensated, right? Because, and you're seeing this with Stephen Colbert, right? So the Emperor Has No Clothes. They lost $40 million on the show because advertisers don't want to pay when you don't have that many eyeballs, right? Especially in key demos. Well, then you've got this shifting landscape on our side, which is that we have eyeballs, but the advertisers were told for so long by these different agencies, like, you can't give them money, you can't advertise with them, but now you're going to get into this new, sort of arena where they have to advertise with independent media because that's where the eyeballs are. And the truth is, we're just beating them, And so that's really important for how you see the future culturally, because if we were able to do it there, we can certainly do it in Hollywood and music and other places too. The thing that's important that we should take from this is, we didn't win that fight with the media by trying to take control of their institutions. We built our own. And
Excellent
that's the
point.
thing we have to be very cognizant of as we approach these other fights. We're not going to win the fight with Hollywood by going and being a part of Hollywood. We're going to beat it by making great things outside the system that people want to see.
That's such an incredible point. Yeah.
And so the barrier to entry, too, like if they don't want to, if they fight us getting into the movie theaters and things like that, like they did with the war on children in Canada, we were actually banned from movie theaters.
Oh my gosh.
So if they want to play that game, they're, again, kicking themselves the same way they did when they tried to ban people from TV shows and news programs because their voices were too controversial or whatever, despite people having interest.
It's like putting the explicit lyrics label on a record album and expecting a teenager not to want it more.
Exactly.
You're going to find avenues to reach people like we did with our movie. Our numbers in Canada were fantastic, despite the ban on the movies at movie theaters, because people wanted to see it and it made them more interested in why did they ban this movie? What's so dangerous about it? And then when people would watch it, they'd be like, that's weird. This movie just wanted to protect kids. Like it's literally just like, let's take the issue of pedophiles or mental health that are in the movie, right? We don't politicize it in the movie. We're very, very neutrally talking about the issues kids face when it comes to sexualization and mental health and the fact that we have the most depressed generation in human history. This is the most mentally ill generation in human history. And I think, again, you talk about why this shift occurred politically for this upcoming generation. They experienced a lot of really difficult things during COVID, and they've seen how their peer group has suffered. They've seen the mental anguish in the group of people who have adopted some of the wokeness, the most. And so they understand the harms of it in very interesting different ways than we ever will. And so, I think it's natural they're rejecting what caused that harm. And so I think they will actually be more conservative than any generation that we actually have seen in America. I think they'll be the most conservative because if you look at the male numbers, what's happened historically, when you have, let's take this to all of human history. What happens by the time people marry? When they marry and have kids, females' political views are the most movable thing in human history. So if you're a liberal girl in college right now, out of all humans, you are the most likely to change your political view and conform it to your husband's. That's all of human history. So what really matters is looking at the male political belief system in that age group right now. And when you look at that, it is dominantly right-wing, the most right-wing we have seen, right? So what's going to happen when they reach that age where they get married and have kids? You're going to see a massive number of females realign their politics to the politics their husbands have and also changing priorities because suddenly when you have kids, you're concerned about safety. You're concerned about, all these different things you weren't concerned about when you were in college and you just wanted people to think you were nice, right? And there's a lot that goes with that, right? Like I almost don't even fault some of these young girls who are in high school or college and they have, sort of more liberal views. They're just concerned at that point about seeming nice, right? And they are lacking a lot of real world sort of experience to understand how niceness can get you killed,
Right.
And that, it can destroy your life. It can destroy your child's life. You can't always be nice. I had this discussion actually yesterday about illegal immigration. You've got all of these leaders out there in the world pretending this is such a complicated problem. Maybe it's the Latino strongman in me, but it's not complicated, okay? You could put me in charge of any country on the face of the earth, any country, I don't care which one it is. I could solve illegal immigration in a month. People might not like it. They might think I'm mean, but I could solve it. I could damn well solve it and nobody would try again, okay? They would not try because it'd be very clear in our country, we don't do this. We don't accept this culturally. We will never accept it. And we will sort of have an iron fist when it comes to this. Doesn't mean we hate people from the outside, but you've got to have, very strong consequences and incentives for what you want out of a society. And frankly, we haven't had that, in a very long time in America.
We're one of the few. Yeah, it's like you look around the world and other countries have it and we don't. Yeah.
Yeah. And even in Trump's first term, we did not have it because Trump was fighting a beast in DC, right?
Yeah.
That was just like, it was constantly just this game of tug of war. And so you weren't able to establish any sort of new cultural identity that said, actually, there's these new incentives. Actually, there's this new way things are going to be done. Everything was a fight. Term two, staffing was done very differently, and the ability to sort of gut a lot of parts of the federal bureaucracy, it was different this time, right? And so I think a lot of people kind of knew what they were doing in ways they didn't know during the first term. And so you are starting to see that shift in expectations and sort of, what incentives we're putting out there. And I think that, my hope is we get more aggressive in that respect, because I think society is all about the incentives that you give the populace. And for my entire life, the incentive structure has been horrific. It has been terrible. It has led us to, more single mother homes than we've ever had. It has led us to horrific crime numbers. It's led us to fentanyl overdoses and numbers I don't even want to talk about. I mean, it's like, this is worse than the deaths we've experienced in world wars, and almost nobody talks about how this happened. And it was just total weakness and cowardice from the American politician. It was like, we could have gone to war over this a long time ago. And I mean, go to war. I mean, we could have sent in special forces to absolutely obliterate cartel bosses decades ago when they were weaker, when they didn't have the ability to train their people in the ways they do now, when they didn't have the tools and lethal capacity they do now, the ability to carry out horrific terror attacks that they could do now. We could have done this. We could have cut the head off of the snake and not grown 2 new heads. We didn't know. Pure cowardice and weakness. And what has it bought us? A bunch of dead Americans.
Yeah,
and so
it's true.
You can go down the line of all of these horrific things that happened. And it all goes back to our political leaders not having the courage, will, or backbone to just do the right things, do very simple things that reset the incentive structure. And I think that's something we've got to prioritize. And that's what we did with our campaign with DEI. We changed the incentive structure. And that was very important to us in how we approached it. Like, we've got to change the incentives for companies. That's why the financial reality of this is very important. It's almost never talked about. But did you know this? With the exception of Harley-Davidson, every single company that we have announced their DEI changes has had their stock go up, even when compared to their competitors within their industry. So if you say, X company went up, we'll take, Walmart, for instance, right? Okay. If you say they went up, you need to know also how much did Amazon go up during this same period, right? And so you've got to look at apples and apples. And that's what we do in our financial analysis of these companies. When we look at the companies that we have made these announcements for, they have gone up in stock to a degree much higher than their competitors within their industry. And the only exception is Harley-Davidson, who fought us the longest. And so what message does that send corporate America? The incentives have changed. You want to make money? That should be your goal, right?
It should be. You'd think.
That's right.
You're a public company. Your responsibility it's a fiduciary duty to the shareholder. That is your legal obligation. And so if you want to make money, the incentives are different now. It's not wokeness, not ESG. It's actually a rejection of these things. Publicly rejecting it will make you money. So
it's been so fun to watch all of your work on that front. It's been absolutely amazing. I love that you're going to keep it going in whatever new format you were referring to earlier. Tell people how they can find the film if they haven't seen it yet, and also how to follow you and the work that you do.
Thanks. If you haven't seen The War on Children, go to thewaronchildren.com. You can see the film there. There's a bunch of different ways. You can go on Amazon Prime too. I think it's called Prime TV or something like that. It's on there, so if you're one of those people who watches on Prime, you can get it there. Which, by the way, is an interesting story in itself, because that is the changing fabric of America. When the movie came out, it was banned on Amazon Prime. It was banned for a year from Amazon Prime.
Gosh.
And then after my corporate campaign, as we get probably 6 months into it, we get a leaked message from an Amazon representative telling us, check Prime today. We check Prime. Suddenly our movie's there. Suddenly our account is no longer banned. Suddenly we're in violation of their policies, right?
What in the world?
That was, I think, an effort on their end to be like, okay, this is like a peace offering, right? And for me, I see it as like, okay, culturally, we can tout this win and show a part of the shifting culture and the landscape of sort of like, this is a new world, right? So that's one place. You can follow me online at Robby Starbuck on every platform. I'm on all of them. I'm most active on X because that's always been my favorite platform. But we post everywhere. So if you're a YouTube person or, Rumble or whatever, you can follow me on any of those. We will be having a regular show rolling out too on top of all this. So you can see the set here,
it's great.
It is great.
Show, and we'll be kind of diving into a lot of these issues, but also explaining a lot of the, sort of political issues of the day and getting into an explanation behind policy and, why certain things don't work. So it's not going to be sort of a typical show. Will be very issue oriented. So like explaining why DEI doesn't work, what is sort of like the secret agenda behind it? What does it mean? Who's behind it? How long has this been going on? It's sort of like diving deeper on issues. So if folks are interested in that, we'll be doing that soon.
Good
Awesome.
deal.
Well,
it's been to talk to you. Yeah.
Great to talk to you. Yeah. Really, really glad to have had the time. And we'd love to have you back another time to hear more about the latest companies that you're exposing, because that's super fun to watch.
Yes,
so we appreciate you being with us, Robby.